Ekam smaramasthadekam bhajamaha tadekam jagat sakshi rupam namamaha sadekam nidhanam niralambamisham bhavam bodhipotam sharanyam vrajamaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. On that alone do we meditate, that alone do we worship, to that alone, the witness of the universe, do we bow, to that one who is our sole eternal support, the self-existent Lord, the raft to safety across the ocean of this world, do we come for refuge. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning. Pleasure to be here with all of you this morning on a beautiful Sunday morning. And our topic is Darshan, seeing the divine. The idea of Darshan it's a concept which permeates all of Vedanta and all of Hinduism. It's as if it from the very beginning to the very end of it, we have this idea of Darshan, this idea of seeing. The word darshan comes from the root drish, which means to see. So darshan, in a sense, it means simply to see, but it means much more than that. It means a kind of auspicious seeing, auspicious sight. It expresses the fundamental axiom of Vedanta. Vedanta claims that God can be seen. Vedanta insists that God can be seen. Not only that God can be seen, God must be seen. God must be seen. We are called upon to see God, to know God, to experience the divine directly. This seeing the divine, this experiencing the divine directly is what is indicated by this word darshan. So I'd like to today take up the idea of darshan and examine some different aspects of this fundamental concept. And, let's start with the very roots of the Vedanta tradition. The roots of the Vedic tradition lie in the Vedas and the Upanishads. There's no founder of Hinduism as there is of other religions. We have the prophets of Judaism, we have the prophet of Islam, we have the incarnation of Christianity, we have the awakened one of Buddhism, we have the Tirthankaras of Jainism, but we don't have any founder of Vedanta, of Hinduism. We have the ancient seers who saw the truth. The ancient rishis, they're called, who saw the truth, and they saw the holy mantras which they expressed. They expressed their experiences in the mantras which became the Upanishads. And this is what has been recorded as scripture, and this is the foundation of Vedanta and the foundation of Hinduism. The direct experience of the sages expressed as what they saw, the seers. And so often the Upanishads use this language of sight, of seeing, of experiencing the truth using this word to see. We see the self. We see the supreme self. We see the divine. Of course, it's a metaphor, not with the physical eyes. But why do we use this term? Why did they use this term seeing for so much of their, meaning directly experiencing truth? Our physical senses determine our entire experience of this world. All the knowledge that we take in from this world, everything we experience through in 5 different ways, through 5 different channels. And the most compelling among these really is the sense of sight. So I think it's a most appropriate metaphor for directly experiencing the divine. And of course we know that many saints and devotees and seekers actually have visions of the divine. They may see in some kind of inner sight the very form of their chosen ideal. And we also use this term in English to mean more than just seeing with the eyes. Say we're trying to explain something to a friend of ours, and suddenly he gets it. He'll say, "Oh yes, now I see. Now I see what you mean." It's expressing an understanding. This same idea is we find in the different philosophical schools of Vedanta. In the Indian tradition, there are a number of different philosophical approaches, and they are called darshanas, different ways of seeing, different approaches to the one truth, which result in different philosophical systems and different understandings of that truth. They're darshanas. They're all approaching the truth, but from different standpoints. So we see this idea of darshan is embedded in the very foundations, the deepest roots of Vedanta. Now, in popular Hinduism, we find this idea that God can be seen brought down to a very practical level in the temple culture which exists in India. Everywhere in India, we find temples. And we go to temples for what? For darshan. We go to the temples for darshan. What? We go to see the divine. We go to see God as manifesting through the holy image enshrined in the temple. It's more than seeing. It's a sacred seeing, an auspicious seeing. It is being in the presence of the divine. This is darshan, being in the presence of the divine. And moreover, not only do we feel when we go to a temple, not only do we feel, I am seeing God, but also God is seeing me. I am seeing God, and let God also see me. If the divine is especially manifest here, as I am experiencing God, let God also see me. There is a reciprocity implied in this idea of darshan, a mutual seeing, a mutual communing. I am seeing the deity is seeing me, and I am being transformed in the presence of the divine. I am being lifted up out of my ordinary, dull self into the consciousness of who I am, which is a divine, immortal soul, in the presence of my beloved Lord, my beloved Mother. Spiritual seekers also recognize in the Indian tradition the great value of visiting saints and holy persons, gurus, teachers. And one spends perhaps a moment or perhaps a longer time, if fortunate, in their holy presence. We feel inspired, we feel uplifted, we feel renewed. The saint blesses us. This too is called darshan, receiving the darshan of a saint. The interesting thing about the language used, that we receive darshan. We receive darshan, and the deity enshrined in the temple, or the saint, the holy person, grants darshan. So this is part of that reciprocity. On the one hand, there's a granting of darshan by the divine, and on the other hand, a receiving of darshan by the seeker. There's a historical incident. There's be so many, but here's an interesting one from the Christian tradition of this granting of darshan. And I'll read from the Bible. Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said, "don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. It's a fascinating passage in which Jesus appears to them as transfigured, as full of light, shining light, and they see it with their eyes. So this is a granting of darshan. And then, of course, it goes even further. A cloud descends and covers them all, and then they become terrified. It reminds us of Arjuna also, when he is granted the darshan of the Vishwarupa, the universal form of Sri Krishna. He also becomes terrified because perhaps he wasn't ready for that vision. He was not yet prepared to receive that vision. So similarly, the disciples of Jesus were not yet ready to receive the full vision which they received, and yet the mercy of the divine, the grace of the divine, Jesus revealed himself, and the divine is constantly revealing itself to us, himself, herself, itself. If we can open our eyes to receive that darshan, open our hearts to receive that darshan. And that's why we say open the heart to receive the darshan, because it's not with the physical eyes generally that we see God, that we see the divine. The Upanishad so aptly points out, and this is one of the famous verses, Param chikani vyatrinat swayambhu tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman kaschidhira pratyagatmanamaikshat avrita chakshu amritatvamichan. So this is from the Katha Upanishad. Yama is explaining spiritual life to his disciple Nachiketa, and he says that our sense organs are defective, actually. They're defective in that they're pointed outwards. All our sense experience, all our organs are receiving information from outside. So it's almost as if they are defective. So he says the Lord has actually injured them, has made them defective in making them pointing outwards. Because what happens? Therefore, because they're all pointing outwards, no one perceives the antaratman, the self, the true self which lies within us. But a rare wise person, kaschidhiraha, what does he or she do? Desiring to see, desiring immortality, desiring to touch that deathless reality which is the very basis of who we are. Avrita chakshuhu, covers his eyes, covers the eyes. Metaphorically, it means we turn within and beholds the self shining within, the pratyagatman. It's a wonderful language, avrita chakshuhu. Striving to see the divine within, we cover the eyes, means we turn all that energy which is mostly focused out, our attention which is focused outward to this world, to gather in, turn it back in upon itself. So this too is darshan, when we experience the divine as shining in the very core of our being. India is a land of sacred geography. The whole world can be seen as a land of sacred geography, but it seems somehow all the more palpable in India. And part of the reason I keep coming back to this is because I just went on a pilgrimage to India, as many of you know. Came back on the 5th of December, or was it the 7th of December? And Hindus go by the millions on pilgrimage to different temples and holy places in India, to receive the darshan of different manifestations of the divine, enshrined in the various temples, on mountaintops, and holy cities. Certain temples, certain deities are felt to be specially awakened. They are said to be jagrata, they are awakened, where one feels all the more strongly this presence of the divine. And like great magnets, these awakened deities are pulling pilgrims from the distant corners of the earth to have darshan of the divine, to come into the presence of God. Places of natural beauty are also understood to be manifestations of the divine. So pilgrims go to have darshan of the Himalayas, the holy peaks of the Himalayas, or the Ganga, the mother Ganga, the holy river Ganges, or so many of the other holy rivers, or the holy birthplace of a great saint or avatar, incarnation of God, or the place where that great world teacher lived his life or her life. They travel hundreds and thousands of miles to have the darshan of a great saint, or even of the tomb of a saint, like the secular pilgrims who come thousands of miles. They come from across the world to Hollywood, hoping to catch a glimpse of a movie star or a celebrity. Yes, they come. They think, will I see that star? What is the name of some of the big stars? I forget. But they come for that reason. So that's also a kind of pilgrimage, actually, coming to Hollywood to see, for devotees of the movie stars. Devotees of God go to catch a glimpse of a great saint. Go to catch a glimpse of the divine as enshrined in a temple. Go to come face to face with the divine while seeing the Himalayas. Of course, the sacred geography is not limited to India, as I said. There are so many holy places in this country as well. And for example, just next door to us in South Pasadena, we have a house where Swami Vivekananda lived for 6 weeks. It's a holy place where we go, every month we go, and people come from across the world to visit this place. There was a woman from Bangalore who came and visited us here in Hollywood. She had scrimped and saved her money for years to make a pilgrimage to America to visit the holy places which Swami Vivekananda touched in this country. And she went to Chicago to see the art museum which was where the Parliament of Religions was held, and she went to Thousand Island Park, and she went to Ridgely Manor, and so many places where Swami Vivekananda lived and where he walked and where he taught. She came all that way just to see these places. So she came for the darshan of Swami Vivekananda. And I met her in India this time when I went. She was still full of the experience of her pilgrimage. The most visited sacred site in Christianity receives over 20 million visitors a year. It's just south of us, in Guadalupe. The mother, our Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. Millions of pilgrims come for the darshan of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Yes, it's the third most visited pilgrim spot in the world, and the number 1 and 2 are actually two Japanese Shinto shrines, believe it or not. How the Mother of Guadalupe, like a big magnet, is drawing her devotees from all over the world to receive her darshan and receive her grace, and how she was first established. She granted her darshan to that poor peasant who had her vision, and then her image was burned upon his cloak. So, how wonderful. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the Hindu temple and the tradition of Hinduism, and how deeply ingrained in Hindu society the temple is. Seeing the sacred image in the temple is such a part of the fabric of daily life. And temple doesn't necessarily mean a huge edifice. It could mean a corner of my own room, because practically every Hindu home will have some shrine and some deities enshrined there. And not only the Hindu home, the Hindu shopkeeper will have a little shrine in his shop, and before he begins his day, he will come for darshan in his little shrine, and he'll make an offering. May today's business be successful. And every taxi driver has a little shrine in his taxi cab, and every bus has a little shrine in the bus, and no bus driver will start the day of plying the streets of Madras or Calcutta without first offering homage at the shrine in the bus, taking darshan before starting the day. It can be, for someone who's not acquainted with it, it can be kind of overwhelming. For those of us who are coming from the Abrahamic traditions, raised in the West where there's a very strong iconoclastic tendency, tradition, especially in Judaism, Islam, and Protestant Christianity. Images of God are not trusted. What are all these pictures? What are all these different deities? And not only there's a monkey god, after all, and a god with an elephant head, and these are two of the most popular. And what is all this? It's kind of overwhelming. And the exception, I suppose, in the West is the Eastern Church, which is east of the West, where they have icons. And they venerate the icons. But even there, they're very clear to say, we don't worship these icons, we venerate them. We venerate them as holy symbols, but we don't actually worship them. So in Hinduism, so many gods, and there's even stones being worshipped as God. So what is all this? My first response, actually, to the bewilderment that people might feel is, go and see if you don't feel something. Go to a holy temple where some monkey god is being worshipped, and close your eyes and see if you don't feel something. That's really what it's about, feeling something. Part of the misunderstanding is that it's a symbol. It's not God. It's not a stone that's worshipped, that's seen as God. It's a symbol, sort of. Because at the same time, yes, the divine does especially manifest through these images and these stones. Yes, through devotion, prayer, rituals, there's a whole science of rituals, and the divine is invoked and installed into these images. And when we go to these temples, we feel something. Swami Vivekananda says, why should man build churches in which to worship God? Why not worship him anywhere? It's a good question. Even if he did not know the reason, he answers his question. Man found that the place where people worshipped God became full of good tanmatras. Tanmatras, meaning vibrations, very, very subtle vibrations. The place became full of good tanmatras, good vibrations. Every day people go there, and the more they go, the holier they get, and the holier that place becomes. It's a kind of science of vibrations. I can relate a personal experience. When I first started becoming interested in Vedanta, and I was coming here sometimes to the Vedanta Society, and I thought, I'd like to have a little shrine of my own. So I bought some wood at the hardware store, and I nailed it together, and I sanded it nicely, and I painted it, and I put it in my room. It was a little thing about this high. And then I got some holy pictures, and I think, I'm not sure, but I'm sure Sri Ramakrishna's picture was there, and Jesus, picture of Jesus, and I found a little statue of Buddha, and so it was a little holy shrine in the corner of my room. And so gradually I started laying some flowers. There was a jade plant right outside the place where I was staying, and it was beautifully flowering. So I would pluck some of those flowers and lay them before the pictures and bow down and feel like I had a little sanctuary. And one day, when I came into the shrine, and I had already laid the flowers there were some jasmine flowers, as I recall, and I bowed down before my little altar, and I felt something. I can't tell you exactly what I felt, but I felt that, yes, this is a holy spot. God is real. That's the Darshan. I had a little experience of Darshan, a little taste of Darshan there in this little, somewhat crude, handmade shrine that I had made myself. So this is the experience I had. Spiritual life can be said, especially for beginners like us, most of us, we can let us acknowledge, frankly, we are still mostly beginners in spiritual life. We can take great help in the science of vibrations. That's why we see so much emphasis in some of the introductory texts on being careful about whom you associate with. Being careful about the kinds of places you go, being careful about the kinds of food that you eat. There's reasons for these. It's because we are trying to lift the vibration of our own mind. So we go to a holy place, and the place is vibrating at a certain frequency. And if we can catch that vibration, we start to feel that God is real, and we start to feel we are in the presence of the divine. If then we go to some unholy place, and the mind then starts vibrating at that level, we forget all about God. God is just some kind of imagination. So, Sri Ramakrishna says, yes, I visited the goddess. He was talking about a form of Mother Durga. Yes, I visited the goddess. She is worshipped by one of the branches of the Malik family of Calcutta. This branch of the family is now in straitened circumstances, and the house they live in is dilapidated. The walls and floor are spotted with moss and pigeon droppings, and the cement and plaster are crumbling. But other branches of the Malik family are well off. This branch has no signs of prosperity. So he's talking about going to this house where the Divine Mother is worshipped, and it's falling apart, pigeon droppings all over the floors. Nevertheless, in that dilapidated house, I saw the face of the goddess radiating a divine light. One must believe in the divine presence in the image. So this idea of the image as the Divine Mother granting her darshan through the image. There is this deep antipathy in the Western mind to images of God. How can you put God is infinite? How can you draw a picture of God? And yet, at the same time, we can ask, how can we conceive of the formless? How can we conceive of the infinite? We are still babies in spiritual life. We need a form to hold on to. And Sri Ramakrishna again and again emphasizes God is both formless, and again God takes forms. That which is formless takes forms. He gives the example of an ocean, which is formless. It's made of water, an infinite expanse of water without any form. And yet, in the extreme northern regions or extreme southern regions, the cold is so intense that that water freezes into ice. It takes forms. So it's that same substance, water, which is formless, which takes the form of ice. In the same way, the infinite ocean of Satchit Ananda, of existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute, which is the divine, which is formless and infinite, yet through the cooling influence of the love of the devotees, it takes forms for us to perceive. One of the images that I love to conceive of how this works is the image of a cathedral. I think most of us have been inside a cathedral, or at least a church with stained glass windows. And there are so many different windows with different depictions of different saints or scenes in the life of Jesus, and some are just magnificent giant rose windows with so many beautiful colors, and others are quite simple, and they're all different. They're all different pictures, mostly pictures of different conceptions of the divine. And yet what enables us to see them? How can we see them? The one sun shining down outside enables us to see all these different beautiful stained glass windows. Similarly, it is that one divine light which is shining through all these different forms, all these different divine forms, whether it's Krishna or Jesus or Allah. And even each one of us is a window in that cathedral of the universe. In this cathedral of the universe, all the divine forms are maybe giant rose windows, and we may be smaller windows, but we too are windows letting through that divine light. And there comes a time in spiritual life when we can open the doors of the cathedral and come out and stand in the full blaze of sunlight. I'd like to describe the way a visit to a temple unfolds in India, maybe a traditional Hindu temple. It unfolds as a series of consecutively closer degrees of intimacy unfolding in this experience. First, we have to reach the temple. This may mean an arduous trek of thousands of miles through mountains, over oceans, walking in the Himalayan heights, or even braving the traffic of Calcutta. Yes, there's also a danger of the journey, and the anticipation and longing begin to grow as we undertake this journey and we approach the Holy Temple. Now, perhaps we are going to a grand temple in South India, which is an enormous edifice. And from a distance, we can see the enormous spires covered with statuary, built hundreds or perhaps thousands of years ago. And we're astonished. This huge, magnificent structure with entirely walled, like a walled city, with these gates, these gopurams, which rise 10, 15 stories above us. And we enter the temple. And we find that we are in a big courtyard, we can say with corridor all the way around. And there's another wall and another gate. And we go around this walk all the way around this next phase, and again we enter into the gate, and we find yet again another corridor with carved columns, and now it's getting dark. It's not so bright anymore. It's getting a little darker. And we enter yet another gate, and it's getting still darker, and it's illuminated only by little oil lamps. And then we begin to approach the Holy of Holies, called the Garbha Mandir, that part of the temple which is the very womb, the very heart of the temple where the deity is enshrined. And if it's a popular temple, there may be thousands of devotees waiting in line, and this line snakes through the temple, through the corridors, and we may have to wait for hours. As we wait, our anticipation grows, and the enthusiasm and the zeal of the devotees surrounding us who are calling out the name of the divine. And the closer we get, the more that intensity, that knowing that we are about to come before the divine, we are about to come face to face with God. And then we finally reach this Holy of Holies, along with the pushing and jostling of the pilgrims and that infectious zeal. And we get perhaps a few seconds, a few moments of darshan, seeing the divine, coming into the presence of God. It may be only a moment, and yet in that moment a life can be transformed. This kind of temple visit really mirrors our spiritual life. There's a deep significance to the fact that the Holy of Holies is enshrined deep in the heart of the temple, and we have to really struggle to reach it, because it's the same with us. The divine is enshrined in the Holy of Holies in our own hearts. But to get there, as we said, we have to cover our eyes, we have to dive within, and the path is an arduous one. We have to struggle to reach it. We begin with a struggle for purity, for devotion. Our eagerness begins to grow. As we continue on the path, our eagerness grows. As we begin to realize that, yes, it is possible to see God, to know God. It's not merely a pipe dream. I actually can know God. Then we learn to dive deep within in our own hearts, into the cave of our hearts. And it is there, in the deepest, inmost level of our being, that we encounter the divine, and we realize that we are one with that infinite love, that infinite peace, that infinite joy. This visiting of temples, which I did quite a bit of in my pilgrimage in India, some may say, well, that's all right for beginners. That's for beginners in spiritual life who need some external props, but we're beyond all that. We all this visiting temples and bowing down before images. We're Vedantists. I'm going to meditate on the self. How amazing then that Swami Brahmananda, on the left, on the bottom tier of the altar, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, not merely a saint, but a saint maker, a fully realized, a fully illumined saint maker, first president of the Ramakrishna order. He used to visit temples a lot, and he used to love to visit temples. And I'd like to read a very wonderful description of one such visit that Swami Brahmananda made to a temple. It's an account from Swami Ambikananda, one of the first swamis, very early swamis of our order, who actually saw Sri Ramakrishna, or rather we should say Sri Ramakrishna saw him, because as an infant, his mother brought him to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna asked her, what have you brought for me? And she laid her son at his feet. And he accepted the boy, the infant, and said, all right, he is now mine. You take care of him. I'll take him back when he's ready. So he ended up becoming a monk of our Ramakrishna order. And here, this reminiscence is when, as a child, he and his family accompanied Swami Brahmananda, called Maharaj in this account, accompanied him on the journey from Vrindavan back to Belur Math. They had visited Vrindavan, the holy city of Krishna, and were on their way back to our headquarters. And I'll read from here. On our way to Belur, Maharaj expressed the desire to visit the Divine Mother's temple at the Vindhyachala mountains. It's on the way. The first night, Maharaj, my father, our host Yogindra Sen, a devotee, and I slept in the same room. It was nearing midnight when I felt a gentle touch. I woke up. I saw Maharaj dressed and covered with a heavy blanket. He said to me, "Get up and dress yourself in warm clothing. I want you to come with me." Without any hesitation, I did as I was told, though it did not occur to me at the time to inquire where we were going. Maharaj took a lantern in one hand and a stick in the other and asked me to follow him. We went outside. It was the night of the new moon and pitch dark. The path was uneven. Realizing that I was stumbling, Maharaj gave me the lantern to carry and held me by the hand. I asked him then, "Where are we going?" He replied, "To see the Divine Mother." When we entered the temple compound, we found the place crowded with worshippers. Some were counting beads, and others were chanting the praises of the Divine Mother. There was an intense spiritual atmosphere. The doors of the temple were still closed. The priests were decorating Mother's image for the special occasion. When the doors opened, the pilgrims stood up and moved forward slowly to have the darshan of Mother. In the meantime, the priests caught sight of Maharaj. Seeing his benign face and impressed by his personality, they stopped the pilgrims from proceeding and let Maharaj enter first. He was still holding my hand, and I was following him. When Maharaj stood before the image of Divine Mother, he exclaimed, "Ah, how beautiful, how beautiful." The next moment, he was in ecstasy. There was perfect silence in the temple. The priests and pilgrims watched Maharaj's God-intoxicated state in amazement. After a while, still in an ecstatic mood, Maharaj asked me to sing a song to Divine Mother. While I was singing, tears of joy fell from the outer corners of his eyes. It was a divine sight to behold. Maharaj asked me to sing another song, after which we prostrated before the Mother and came out into the courtyard. Maharaj sat down in one corner to perform japa and asked me to sit also. I said, "What shall I do?" Maharaj replied, "Think of the presence of Divine Mother. Later I shall instruct you." We stayed for a while and returned to Yogendra Sen's before daybreak. So this illumined soul loved to go to temples, and there he would go into ecstasy. Again and again we find this. He must have stayed at the Vindhyachal in this area. He stayed for several weeks, though they were going back to Belarmat, and it was just to be a one-night stop. They stayed for several weeks, and there were a number of temples in the area where Maharaj would go. Of course, the illumined souls go to the temples not only to experience the divine, but to contribute to the holiness of the place. And by their prayers, their meditation performed in that place, the vibrations, the manifestation of the divine there is all the more concentrated. So this is really what I'm talking about, trying to talk about this darshan, experiencing the divine directly, like this in mystic vision, seeing the divine both without and within. Both without and within. So we can ask, how do we get this deeper darshan, where we see God both without and within, when we really know that we are seeing God? Arjuna in the Bhagavad-Gita, he has received the teachings of Sri Krishna, and he has been convinced. He's ready to take up arms as is his duty. But then he asks, Krishna, I want to see you as you really are. I want to see your universal form. And it's a most moving passage where Sri Krishna agrees, and he tells him, behold, pashya me partha rupani, behold my many forms. And then he tells him, Natu mam shakyase drashtum anenaiva svachakshusha divyam dadami te chakshuhu pashya me yogam aishwaram. But Arjuna, you cannot see me with your physical eyes. I give you divya chakshuhu. I give you divine sight. I give you the divine eyes through which you can see. Through this sight, behold my supreme yoga power. And then Sri Krishna reveals to Arjuna his supreme Ishvara form. He grants the darshan. And of course, Arjuna is overwhelmed to experience this. It's both awesome and terrifying. And that's a story for another day. But this divya chakshuhu, this is the divine sight. This is how we see the divine. And this is also mentioned in the Upanishads. Na sandrishe tishtati rupamasya, na chakshusha pashyati kaschadainam, hrida hridistham manasaya enam, evam viduramritaste bhavanti. From the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. His form, the divine form, does not stand within the range of the senses. No one perceives him with the eye. Those who know him realize him through the faculty of intuition, as seated in the heart, and become immortal. Here, this divine eye is referred to as Hrida Manasa, a kind of deep intuition by the heart, by the mind. This is often called dhi, that deep spiritual, that subtle spiritual mind that we call our heart or our buddhi, our faculty of spiritual perception, which all of us have. We all have this faculty, only most people, it's undeveloped. It's asleep, as it were. So this is to be developed, it is to be awakened. And well, how do we awaken it? Well, that's what spiritual life, in a sense, is all about, awakening our this faculty of spiritual perception, this divya chakshuhu, this divine eye. It's through practice. It's through repeating the guru-given mantra, which awakens it, which awakens the spiritual power that lies latent within us. M, the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who wrote the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and for which we are eternally grateful to him, he asked Sri Ramakrishna this same question. He's a new disciple, and learning about this idea of seeing God. And he says, when one sees God, does one see him with these eyes? And Sri Ramakrishna gives a wonderful answer. He says, God cannot be seen with these physical eyes. In the course of spiritual discipline, one gets a love body. He calls it the Premir Sharir, the body made of prema, which is divine love, that highest love for the divine. One gets such a love body endowed with love eyes, love ears, and so on. One sees God with these love eyes. One hears the voice of God with those love ears. One even gets a sexual organ made of love. At these words, M burst out laughing. As we can imagine, it's kind of awkward. And Sri Ramakrishna continues completely unfazed, unannoyed. He continues, within this love body, communion with the Atman, communion with the Supreme Self takes place. And then M becomes serious again. He notes all this in the book. In his book, he notes that he bursts out laughing, then he becomes serious. And Sri Ramakrishna continues, but this is not possible without intense love of God. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves him with great intensity. It is like a person with jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I verily am he. It's a deep passage, a wonderful passage, culminating in the darshan of God in everything, seeing the divine in everything and everywhere, and finally feeling that I am that. I am verily he. So it is, in this conception, it is through love, when we are on the path of love, and most of us, I think, are trying to love God. When that love awakens and becomes intense, Sri Ramakrishna describes how we develop a kind of love body with love eyes. And it is through this love body that we commune with the divine, that we see the divine. And as that mood deepens, as that darshan deepens, we begin to see the divine everywhere. And like someone with jaundice, I looked this up. Scientifically, I don't think one who has jaundice, one gets yellow eyes. I don't think you actually see things as yellow. But the eyes get yellow. So the idea is that because as if you put on a pair of rose-colored glasses, you see everything rose. The actual eyes get yellow, so you see everything as yellow. In this experience of having love eyes, one sees everything as full of love. One sees the beloved everywhere. One sees God everywhere. And finally, one's own self is perceived as God. Let me close here. I've been trying to express something of this idea of darshan, this fundamental concept of darshan in the Vedantic and Hindu tradition, which more than anything says to me, it speaks of this fundamental purpose of our life, which is to know God, to see God, that God can be seen, that God must be seen, that God must be known directly, experienced directly, and that it is possible, and that we are getting hints of it all the time, that every time we come to a temple, we are seeing God. Every time we walk in the street and look in the faces of the passers-by, we are seeing God. When that inner organ awakens, when our love eyes open, we will see God everywhere. Let me close with a quote from Swami Vivekananda. Let the world go, he says, let the world go. Love and ask nothing. Love and look for nothing further. Love and forget all the isms. Drink the cup of love and become mad. Say thine forever, O Lord, and plunge in, forgetting all else. The very idea of God is love. Seeing a cat loving her kittens, stand and pray. God has become manifest there. Literally believe this. Repeat, I am thine, I am thine, for we can see God everywhere. Do not seek for him, just see him.